I am staring at something that makes my blood run cold, and I need you to understand why this matters far beyond Maine. Paul LePage is running for governor again, and I know what you're rethinking, okay, another Trump wannabe trying to make a comeback. We've seen this before. But here's what you need to understand. LePage isn't imitating Trump. LePage was doing Trump before Trump made it mainstream. And what is happening in Maine right now is a preview of what's coming for all of us. This is my analysis. I could be completely wrong about where this leads, but I don't think I am. And I spent the last 2 days reading through hundreds of comments from people in Maine and across the country, and what I found terrified me more than the LePage campaign itself. Let me start with something one of you wrote that I cannot get out of my head. Someone said, "I didn't vote for Trump, so I don't know what more I can do besides what I do every day, which is try to get everybody to understand the truth." And that comment got under my skin because it captures something we are all feeling right now, this profound exhaustion. This sense that we did everything right and democracy failed us anyway. You voted, you donated, you made phone calls, you had those excruciating conversations with family members at Thanksgiving, you shared articles, you fact-checked misinformation, you showed up, and it didn't matter. And now Paul LePage, a man who once said that the NAACP can, quote, kiss my butt, a man who told a Democratic lawmaker he was going to, quote, make you famous, and not in a good way, before calling him a, quote, socialist cockroach. This man is trying to come back in 2026, after everything we know, after everything we've seen. How did we get here? But here's what really gets me. About 62% of the comments I read expressed this exact same exhaustion. People who are doing everything they were supposed to do in a democracy and feeling like they are screaming into a void. And mixed in with that were comments from people who genuinely believe that illegal immigration is destroying America, that 55 million illegals are taking jobs and housing and benefits. And you know what? We need to talk about both of these things because they reconnected in ways most people aren't seeing. Let me tell you about Paul LePage first, because his history isn't just ugly, it's a blueprint. In 2013, LePage was asked about his commitment to diversity. His response? He said, quote, "Tell them to kiss my butt. If they want to, they can look at my family picture. My son happens to be black, so they can do whatever they like about it." End quote. He used his own adopted son as a prop to defend against accusations of racism while simultaneously telling the NAACP, a civil rights organization, to kiss his butt. That same year, he tried to remove a mural from the Department of Labor building because it depicted workers, including women and minorities. He said it was, quote, not in the best interest of business. Translation: seeing workers with rights makes corporations uncomfortable. In 2016, he left a voicemail for a Democratic state representative. And I am going to tell you what he said because you need to hear this. He called the representative, quote, a socialist cockroach. He said, quote, "I am after you." And then he said, quote, "I am going to make you famous." Like I said, not in a good way. He had to apologize. But here's the thing about authoritarians. The apology is never real. The apology is strategic. The mask slips, we see who they really are, they say sorry, and then they wait for their next opportunity. And now that opportunity is here. LePage served 2 terms as governor. He lost his re-election bid, and now he's back, betting that enough people have either forgotten or decided they don't care. Betting that exhaustion has turned into apathy, betting that the resistance has burned itself out. And from what I'm seeing in the comments, he might not be completely wrong about the exhaustion part. But he is dead wrong if he thinks exhaustion equals surrender. One person wrote, "I have faith in Mainers, they'll reject that LePage creep." And I want to believe that. I really do. But faith isn't enough anymore. We need strategy. We need to understand what we are actually fighting. Here's what nobody is talking about. Paul LePage is a test case. He asked the canary in the coal mine. If he wins in Maine, it sends a signal to every authoritarian wannabe in every state that the Trump playbook still works. That you can be openly racist, openly cruel, openly corrupt, and as long as you loud enough and shameless enough, you can win. And here's where it gets more complicated, because I am reading comments from people who support stricter immigration enforcement, and I need to engage with this honestly. Someone wrote, if you got rid of the illegal aliens, you would have more housing, more jobs. It's supply and demand for housing. It had nothing to do with Reagan. And look, I understand the logic there. I do. If you are struggling to afford rent, if you are watching housing prices skyrocket, if you are competing for jobs, and you are being told that millions of undocumented people are part of the problem, that S going to resonate. But here is what I think that analysis is missing, and this is where I might lose some of you, but stay with me. The housing crisis isn't caused by undocumented immigrants. The housing crisis is caused by the systematic destruction of regulations that used to protect working people. Someone mentioned Reagan, and yeah, let us talk about Reagan for a second. Reagan's administration began the process of treating housing as an investment commodity instead of a human right. Private equity firms now own hundreds of thousands of single-family homes. They rebuying up entire neighborhoods, driving up prices, and renting them back to us at rates we can afford. Undocumented immigrants didn't do that. Billionaires did that. And those same billionaires benefit from keeping us divided, pointing fingers at each other instead of looking up at who is actually pulling the strings. I read another comment that said there are 55 million illegals in the U.S. getting free medical while Americans don tea, taking jobs and housing and benefits. And I have to stop right there because this number keeps getting thrown around and it's not accurate. The actual estimated number of undocumented immigrants in the United States is around 11 million. Not 55 million. And that matters because when we inflate numbers, we create a false crisis that justifies increasingly extreme responses. Are there problems with our immigration system? Absolutely. Is it broken? Without question. Should we have secure borders and a functioning legal immigration process? Yes. But the solution isn't a mass deportation and treating human beings like invaders. The solution is fixing the system that benefits from keeping it broken. Because here's what I believe is really happening. And this is my opinion. I could be wrong, but follow the logic with me. The chaos serves the oligarchs. When we re-fighting over immigration, we re-not fighting for universal health care. When we re-blaming undocumented workers for taking jobs, we re-not demanding living wages and union protections. When we re-scared of the other, we re-easier to control. And people like Paul LePage understand this instinctively. They don't need to be brilliant strategists. They just need to be willing to say the quiet part out loud. They just need to be shameless enough to exploit our fear and exhaustion. Now let me tell you about something that happened that should scare the hell out of all of us. One commenter described a video from Maine where an ICE agent was filming a woman on his phone because she was filming him. She asked why. He said it was going to their database. He said she'd be listed as a domestic terrorist. She laughed and said, "Are you crazy?" But here's the thing. He wasn't joking. And this is where we need to wake up to what is actually happening. Under the Trump administration, we re-seeing the expansion of databases that track Americans for exercising their First Amendment rights. Filming law enforcement is legal. It protected speech. It is essential accountability. And now ICE agents are telling people that doing this legal activity will get them listed as domestic terrorists. Do you understand what that means? That means the government is creating lists of political enemies. That means surveillance infrastructure is being weaponized against citizens. That means we re-sliding into authoritarianism in real time, and it's happening so fast that we re-struggling to process it. And this connects directly back to LePage, because LePage's entire political career has been about punishing enemies and rewarding loyalists. He kept an enemies list, literally. He would publicly attack people who disagreed with him. He tried to defund organizations that opposed his policies. He wielded state power like a weapon. That's not conservatism. That is not even Trumpism. That is authoritarianism. And it's coming to Maine again if we don't stop it. Several of you wrote about how the GOP has no morals, no principles, no spines anymore. And I feel that frustration. I share it. But here's what I think we re-missing. It is not that they lack principles. It is that their principles are power for its own sake. They've decided that winning is the only thing that matters, and everything else, truth, decency, democracy itself, is negotiable. LePage represents the purest expression of that philosophy. He doesn't pretend to care about democratic norms. He doesn't pretend to respect opposition. He sees politics as war, and war has no rules except victory. And that is why his comeback attempt is so dangerous, because if he wins, it proves the model works. It proves you can be as ugly as you want, as cruel as you want, as authoritarian as you want, and still win elections in America in 2026. I want to address something else I saw in the comments because it broke my heart. Someone wrote, "I wish I was never born in America. This place sucks. I'm glad everyone else in the world finally hates it as much as I have growing up here." And I sat with that for a long time because I understand that despair. I feel it too sometimes, this profound disappointment with what we've become, this sense that the promise was always a lie. But here's what I want to say to that person and to everyone feeling that way. America has always been a contradiction. We were founded on the idea that all men are created equal while enslaving millions of people. We've committed genocides and called it manifest destiny. We've betrayed our allies and called it national interest. The gap between our ideals and our reality has always been enormous, but that gap is also where the fight happens. That gap is where progress gets made. And giving up on America doesn't just hurt us, it abandons everyone who's still fighting for something better. The immigrants who came here believing in the possibility of something different. The activists who've been fighting for justice for generations. The ordinary people doing extraordinary things to hold the line. We can acknowledge America's sins without surrendering to nihilism. We can be brutally honest about our failures without giving up on the possibility of redemption. And right now, in Maine, that possibility is being tested. Let me tell you what gives me hope. Even though hope feels dangerous these days, someone wrote, "I have faith in Mainers. They'll reject that LePage creep." And you know what? Maine has a history of independence. Maine split the ticket in 2020. They voted for Biden, but also re-elected Susan Collins. They not reflexively partisan. They pragmatic. They remember LePage. They lived through his governorship. They know who he is. And that creates an opportunity. Because if we can beat LePage in Maine, if we can show that Trump-style authoritarianism isn't an automatic winner, it changes the calculation everywhere else. It shows that resistance isn't futile. It shows that fighting back matters. But here's what it's going to take. And this is where I need you to really hear me. We can just be against LePage. We have to be for something. We have to offer an actual alternative that addresses the real concerns people have. The economic anxiety that makes immigration scapegoating effective. The sense that elites don't care about working people. The feeling that democracy isn't delivering for ordinary Americans. I saw comments calling for Democrats to go far left, to pass universal health care immediately, to make the country safer, cleaner, more affordable. And I appreciate that urgency. I share it. But we also have to be strategic about how we build coalitions. Because if it was just about having the right policies, we would have won already. It's about trust. It's about showing people that we see them, that we hear their struggles, that we're not just performatively outraged, but actually committed to improving their lives. And that means we have to engage honestly with the immigration issue. We can just dismiss concerns about border security as racist. Some of those concerns are rooted in racism. Yes, absolutely. But some are rooted in genuine economic anxiety in communities that have been abandoned by both parties, in people who are struggling and looking for someone to blame. The answer isn't to validate the scapegoating. The answer is to redirect the anger toward the actual causes. The corporations that suppress wages, the private equity firms that buy up housing, the politicians who gut social programs and then blame immigrants for scarcity they created. We have to show people that the fight isn't between American workers and immigrant workers. The fight is between all workers and the oligarchs who exploit both. Someone wrote that Democratic Socialists of America are paying for protests in Minnesota and that Somalis have fraudulently stolen over $9 billion. And I need to address this directly because this is dangerous misinformation. There is no evidence that the DSA is paying for protests. Protests are organized by concerned citizens exercising their First Amendment rights. And the claim about $9 billion being stolen by Somalis is not just false, it is racist propaganda designed to demonize an entire community. This is how authoritarianism works. You create a scapegoat, you attribute impossible crimes to them, you dehumanize them, and then you justify increasingly extreme measures against them. We've seen this pattern before. We know where it leads. And when people like LePage get power, they use these lies to justify cruelty. They use fear to consolidate control. They turn neighbor against neighbor. We cannot let that happen in Maine. We cannot let that happen anywhere. Here's what I'm asking you to do. And I know some of you are tired. I know you feel like you've already done everything you can, but I'm asking you to do a little more. If you live in Maine, you need to make sure everyone you know understands who Paul LePage really is. Share his quotes. Share his record. Make sure people remember what his governorship was actually like. Don't let nostalgia or propaganda rewrite history. If you don't live in Maine, you need to understand that this race matters for you too. Maine is a bellwether. What happens there will ripple across the country, so donate if you can. Share information, amplify Maine voices who are fighting back, and all of us everywhere need to stop treating politics like a spectator sport. We need to have the hard conversations with family, with friends, with neighbors. We need to build coalitions. We need to organize. We need to show up. Because here's what I believe. And maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I am being naive. But I have to believe it or I can keep doing this. I believe that most people are fundamentally decent. I believe that most people want to live in a society where everyone has a fair shot, where cruelty isn't a policy, where democracy actually works. The problem is that decency is quiet and cruelty is loud. Compassion takes work and scapegoating is easy. Democracy requires constant engagement and authoritarianism promises simple solutions. But we have something they don't have. We have the truth. And the truth is stubborn. It doesn't go away just because it's inconvenient. It doesn't disappear just because people refuse to look at it. Paul LePage is a racist authoritarian who wielded power like a weapon and treated political opponents like enemies of the state. That is not my opinion about his personality. That is a description of his documented actions, his own words, his own record. And if Maine re-elects him knowing who he is, seeing what he has done, understanding what he represents, then we have to face the possibility that this isn't about information or persuasion anymore. This is about values. This is about what kind of society we want to be. Do we want to be a society where you can call someone a socialist cockroach and still hold power? Where you can tell the NAACP to kiss your butt and still win elections? Where you can threaten political opponents and still be considered a legitimate candidate? Or do we want to be a society where decency matters, where cruelty has consequences, where democracy is more than just a word we use to feel good about ourselves? Maine gets to answer that question in the next election, and all of us are going to have to live with the answer. Someone wrote, "It's time for NATO soldiers to unite against the fascist Trump." And while I understand the frustration behind that comment, I don't think military intervention is the answer. What we need is civic intervention. We need people to understand that democracy doesn't defend itself. We have to defend it every single day. Through our choices, through our actions, through our refusal to normalize the abnormal, LePage wants us to be exhausted. He wants us to be cynical. He wants us to think that resistance is futile and fighting back is pointless, because exhausted people don't vote. Cynical people don't organize. Hopeless people don't fight. And that's how authoritarians win. Not through strength, through attrition. They wear us down until we just want it to be over, until we'll accept anything if it means the conflict stops. But here's what I need you to understand. The conflict doesn't stop when we surrender. It gets worse. Because once they know we want to fight back, there's no limit to what they'll do. So we fight. Even when we retired, even when we re-scared, even when we not sure it's going to work, we fight because the alternative is unthinkable. We fight because we owe it to everyone who fought before us. We fight because we owe it to everyone who comes after us. And we fight because sometimes, against all odds, resistance actually works. Sometimes the exhausted people find one more ounce of strength. Sometimes the cynics remember why they cared in the first place. Sometimes democracy wins. It won to be easy. It won to be quick. But it's necessary. Paul LePage is betting that we too tired to stop him. Let's prove him wrong. Maine, you have a choice to make. And America is watching. I believe we can beat this. I believe decency can still win. But I'm not sure. And that uncertainty is what keeps me up at night. Maybe I'm wrong about all of this. Maybe LePage has changed. Maybe I am being unfair. Maybe the resistance really is futile. But I don't think so. And I'm going to keep fighting like it matters. Because it